Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your patience as we sorted out some technical difficulties. But we're, on behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Denny Aaberg to discuss Big Wednesday, published by our friends at Rare Bird Books. Based on true events and legendary surfers of the 1960s, the Big Wednesday novel follows three Malibu surfers as the joys of youth and their carefree lifestyles are challenged by societal expectations, the looming war in Vietnam, and the inevitable passage of time. The book is co-authored by Denny, a good-natured surfer, writer, musician from Pacific Palisades, California, best known as co-writer of Warner Brothers' 1978 surfing film Big Wednesday, and he wrote it with John Milius, a screenwriter, director, and producer of motion pictures. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Roger McGrath, a lifelong Californian. Roger was reared in Pacific Palisades, where he became buddies with Denny when the two of them were 4 years old. They began surfing together at Malibu in the late 50s and have remained stoked for life. In the mid-60s, Roger took a hiatus from surfing to become a Marine and a pilot, earned a PhD, and taught college for more than 30 years, including 15 years at UCLA. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature. I see one in there already, and you can order your copy of Big Wednesday from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests and hopefully see our guests. Aha, there you are. Welcome.
Can you make it full screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, we're here finally. Hi, everybody. Sorry we're late.
You know,
we ran out of gas.
surfers trying to work a computer, you know. So.
Yeah, okay, I'm here with my lifetime buddy, Roger.
And I'm here with my lifetime buddy, Denny Aaberg.
But I would like to say one thing. My name, it's a Norwegian name, is pronounced Aaberg. Like when you do your tonsils. So it's Aaberg.
And, I would have asked you in the green room if we had a chance.
That's
so
okay.
Thank you, Aaberg.
That's okay.
Perfect.
So Roger and I met in nursery school, 4 years old, and we're actually been friends ever since. It's amazing. And we grew up in Pacific Palisades, which was actually like a rural town. You know, it was near Los Angeles, but you had no feeling you were in the city. It was like a rural town with empty lots and just middle class people, really. There was some movie stars and so on, but pretty down home place. And we had the free run. When we were kids, we just were real adventurous, and we just hiked in the canyons or hiked to the beach, did about anything we wanted. So we discovered body surfing at a young age, I think, 7, 8 years old. We go down to the beach, just hike down there. And what's amazing is we go out, just the two of us, and no lifeguards anywhere, no supervision whatsoever from parents, and go out on big surf days and body surf. I mean, you think about it, it's pretty amazing. Like treacherous riptides and everything. We just sort of pulled it off, and we learned about the ocean that way. And along about 1956, I have an older brother, Kemp Aaberg, and he got stoked on surfing. There was not very many surfers around. All the boards were made out of balsa wood. It was a brand new kind of thing. And so he got completely obsessed with it at age 16. We were 9 years old. And we watched my brother Kemp, come home from a day of surfing with his eyes glazed over, like he was stoked out of his mind. What is this guy onto, And as the years went on, we'd watch him patch surfboards and, put color on the boards and smell the resin. And we got to watch him surf, Malibu and Rincon and all this, and we knew that surfing was something we had to do, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so finally, Kemp, the foam surfboards came on about 1959. He had one, the first foam boards. It was all wood boards, all balsa wood. And it changed over to this styrofoam foam, and it made boards much lighter. And Kemp had one of the first ones, and they were very crude. The foam was all bubbly, and they had to cover it up with color because it was very, they didn't perfect the technology until later. So there was one that kind of, the glass was coming away from, separating from the foam. And so Kemp said, okay, you can use this. I don't care about it anyway. Let us use one of his huge 9/6 boards, and we're tiny little 80-pound guys, you know. But we were going to go surfing and catch our very first wave. And it was the March of 1959. And what happened, Roger?
Yeah, Kemp gave us this board to use that was given to him for a movie Slippery and Wet by Velzy and Jacobs. And so this thing was for Kemp. I mean, and we were just kids, 11 years old. And we got this board, 9/6, and Denny on the nose block, and I was on the tail block. And we carried it up to the point at Malibu and then got on it, tandem paddled it, because together we only weighed 160 pounds. So we tandem paddled it out on the point in the lineup. And then one of us would tread water and the other would paddle into a wave and take a wave. And both of us, the first waves we ever paddled into, we just sprang up. I mean, we've been skateboarding for quite a few years, and of course, body surfing. And we sprang right up and surfed the wave into the beach, straight off though. And after a few waves, we kind of learned to turn, watch the older guys and how they gave it some body English and turned the board. And that was our first day. And we surfed that entire week. It happened to be Easter week. So we were out of school. And so we surfed every day at Malibu. And really by the end of the first week, we were pretty good in catching these Malibu waves. It was only about 1 to 2 feet, but that was perfect for us.
So, okay. So that's how we started. And we got our own boards soon after that and kept going to Malibu and different surf spots. And it was, you know, the fresh beginning days of surfing were so exciting because there was no big surf industry. Everything was brand new. You just roped your board on top of the car or stuck it in the back, took out the back seat of your Chevy or whatever and stuck it in the back. It was exciting because it was so kind of primitive and we were pioneering, you know. You kind of had to figure everything out. You just cut off your blue jeans and those were your trunks, you know. Cut off, they call them cutoffs, you know. There was no fancy industry and the technology was almost zero. You just had a rotary phone that rang. If nobody was there, you just tried again. There was not even an answering machine. No surf reports at all. So that was the world we began in. And so I want to jump to the book here. And what we're talking about is this wonderful book. It was published, it just came out in August 10 by Rare Bird Books. And they did a terrific job. It's a very handsome book. As you can see, my friend and artist, Rick Sharp, painted the cover. And it's got a nice cover. I'll tell you a little bit what it's laid out like. It's got this map of the coast with the surf spots in it. This kind of clever map. And then it has a nice photo insert in here of some really historic pictures, like old Malibu mainly, and, you know, characters from that time. And then in the back of the book, it's got the story, the Big Wednesday novel at the back. There's an afterword, some extra things. So it has this nice afterword that I wrote, and it has a glossary of surfing terms. You know, kind of a humorous, like what's a bone crusher? You know, if you don't know what a bone crusher, you just look it up. You know, and it's a wipeout wave. It's a big treacherous wave. It has a query letter by John Milius. You know, it began. It's an interesting story, but Big Wednesday really, the idea began with a novel. The idea of writing a novel by John Milius. He had the first idea. And he liked that title, Big Wednesday, which was the name of a John Severson surfing movie. you know, an early 16 millimeter beginning, you know, old time surfing movie, but it had a great title, and it was about this day, Big Wednesday, when all the big days come and all that. So he used that title, which he later paid Severson to use. But so John started to write it as a book, and the story is he kind of abandoned that project, and later on we wrote the screenplay together. And you know, the Big Wednesday movie came out, and there was what they call a novelization. A novelization is something you see in the airport, you know, where they say Star Wars and they have a novelization of the screenplay. It's something that's really just the screenplay put into the past tense, you know, basically. And that's what the first book, Big Wednesday, some people have that, but it was a abandoned book. But that wasn't this at all. So that kind of went down with the movie, which was a flop at first. Believe it or not, they took it from distribution. But what's interesting, it made a huge comeback. As soon as they started the video market in the early 80s, everybody learned about Big Wednesday and caught on to the whole thing. So suddenly over the years, and the DVDs did well, and it was on TV, it became this kind of cult movie, you know, surfing cult movie. And I was thinking all these years, God, there's no novel. That's the missing link, you know, because what if we had the novel too? So I started working hard on the idea about 2010 of making a really good book, turning the book into what we want it to be, what John always wanted it to be. And John and I were talking all the time about it on the phone, and I gave him a first draft. And sadly and tragically, John had a really bad stroke. And so he was unable to talk and write for a long time. And the book got canceled, got shelved once again. But I decided about 3 years ago I was gonna follow through and get it done. So this is the end result. So we finally got it done, and River put it out, and I'm really stoked. So John has this query letter in here that he put in 1971 for the first Big Wednesday novel. That's a good read. And then there's essays. There's one by Don James, who was a pioneer surfer. You know, he talks about surfing in there at Malibu in the 1930s. He went when he had the big redwood boards. And that's a nice little story he tells. Peter Townend, who was one of the doubles for William Catt in the movie, champion surfer. Peter Townend writes a nice piece, a nice essay in here. There's one by Tatsuo Takei, guy from Japan. He learned about Big Wednesday from seeing the video in his local store in Japan. And he got stoked on longboarding and all that. And then he came to California, has been here ever since. And he wrote a nice essay. That's in here. And then Roger McGrath takes it home with a nice essay. So that's kind of what the layout of this book is. So before we get, answer a few questions, we just want to read a couple of real short excerpts. That's okay. Just to give you a sense of, and we can kind of bounce off that. All right. So I'll put on my reading glasses. And okay, so the book is also it's divided into 4 sections by the seasons. It's got the spring of 1961, and the summer of 1961 is when it starts. And that's what I'm going to read. Then it goes to the fall of 1965, then the winter of 1968, and the big climatic day and all that. I don't want to spoil the story. That's in the spring of 1973. So it's the sections are divided by the 4 seasons. And by the way, the cover depicts a climatic scene in the movie, which I won't give away, but you can tell there's big waves, Okay. So this first one, this is from the first section, the summer of 1961. And this is how the novel has always started from the very beginning. It's called The Narrator's Introduction to the Summer of 1961. Okay, let me see. I remember a wind that blew down through the canyons before dawn. It was a hot wind and carried with it the sweet smell of warm places, blowing hard down the steep hills, covered with scrub oak and manzanita. The fierce wind rushed up past the beach houses, across the point at Malibu, and up the faces of unseen waves, hollowing them and whipping their crests back in their great white plumes. And it goes on to talk about how we'd sleep in our cars and we'd wake up and see these empty waves peeling by, and we'd just put on our trucks and run out there. That's the way it was. There was very few surfers. If you went early in the morning, you could get days like that. And when the sun came up, there would be no one in the water. Now there'd be
50, 75 boards.
yeah, okay. So I jumped ahead to, this is from the fall of 1965, and there's a section here I just want to kind of bounce off of. So it says, this is from the narrator's introduction. Each section starts with the narrator's introduction, then it just goes into the narrative. So it sounds autobiographical, but it's supposed to be a fictional character who the narrator is. And he says, our time at Malibu came in 1959. We were the new generation of Grimmies. Those first few years of surfing were magical. To leave the pressures of society on shore and immerse ourselves in the water was total freedom. It was our great escape. We showed up at the tail end of the pioneering days when surfing was a primitive and relatively unknown sport. It was before the freeways. Our buddies who were old enough to drive filled their gas tanks at World Gas Station for 25 cents a gallon and took us on adventures along the coast, knowing there would be empty waves to ride. In the late 50s, the purity was still there in Southern California. There was the feeling of those days. It was a feeling of purity. There was uncrowded coastline. Everything wasn't developed yet. And we were lucky to come in at that time and be surfers, because there was so much opportunity to find uncrowded waves. And you know, it was just Woody station wagons. You hear songs about Woodies, but that's what it was. You just could buy an old car. I bought my first car for $75, an old Chevy, a 51 Chevy, and the more beat up, the better, Old Woody station wagons the sides were all rotted out. The wood was rotted out, and surfers, you'd drive on the coast and see all these guys going back and forth and then wave at each other, stop and talk, because it was a tribe. It was just beginning. And so it was really a wonderful time. And that's what Big Wednesday is, really a kind of a surfing historical novel. It's focusing on Malibu, but it's Southern California. At that time, you think about it, it was 60 years ago. The summer of 1961, it was 60 years ago. And so there's so different than it is now. And then it progresses through the changes that we all went through during the 60s. And that's kind of the arc of the story. So I want to invite Roger to read a little excerpt from his essay at the end of the book, and then he can bounce off that. So go ahead. I think he's starting there.
Yeah, first I might preface this by saying that, reinforcing what Denny was saying, you have to remember California in the 1950s, in the late 50s even, there's 24 million fewer people than there are today in California. I mean, just imagine removing 24 million people from California and removing all the infrastructure that goes with that, industry and housing and roads and everything else. And so California in the 50s, going up and down the coast, most of it was still semi-rural. And that's what we're talking about here. And surfing spots were still being discovered. I mean, imagine that. And of course, we didn't have wetsuits. We didn't have surf leashes. And we didn't have some kind of special surf wax. It was paraffin wax that you could buy in the market that your mom used for canning. And so the whole environment was so much very different. Okay, and so, and I introduced a lot of that, but I said the early 60s were more of the same. Still no wetsuits or surf leashes or shortboards, and still manageable crowds during the worst of times, and no crowds during the best of times. There were no surf reports, and it took a full day or more for surfers who lived even a little way inland to get word that a swell had hit. And we always, thought, oh God, we got a full day of surfing before anybody else showed up. We would simply check the waves from the bluffs in the Palisades at first light. This often meant a day of surfing before the word got out. Moreover, back then, if it were during a work week and school was in session, there were very few people in the water, period. To look at crowded surf spots today, one would think that no one works or goes to school anymore. If the events described in Big Wednesday ring with authenticity, it is because they really happened, not necessarily restricted to 3 surfers, but to the surfers of the era. To help the students in my California history classes really understand what surfing was like in those days, I wished I could have had them read this edition of Big Wednesday, but it didn't exist until now. So it would be an assigned book. And I might mention that in my California history class at UCLA, and all the classes, Denny would come in and make guest appearances. And I not only showed surfing movies, old surfing documentary movies, footage, but also clips from Big Wednesday. And by then, as Denny said, it was a cult classic. I mean, I had hundreds of students out there in these big, large auditoriums at UCLA and just stomping and cheering. So it was just great. And we could see how it appealed to a younger generation, maybe 2 younger generations now, of something they never had the opportunity to experience.
Yeah. So that kind of gives it in a nutshell what the book is about. And I think it would be good to open it up to some questions if anybody wants to know more. Try our best to answer it.
Okay, so we have one question here now, and I'll just remind everyone watching, you should add one if you have them, add them here. So Kay says, I read the book. In the afterword, it mentions Denny recently worked on updating the novel. Can Denny discuss what is different in this new iteration versus the 1978 version of the novel?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned that a little earlier, that the fact is that I had like little over 2 months to do the first novel. It was kind of an afterthought, Our agent, Jeff Bird, for John Milius and I made a deal with Bantam Paperbacks and said, okay, you got 2 months to turn this screenplay into a novel. Because the movie was released in 1978 and the book was going to come out at the same time as a tie-in. They call it a movie tie-in, So when the movie was released in 1978, the book was put on, released at the same time, the paperback. So what happens when you try to do that in 2 months? You can only do a very unfleshed out quickie version of the screenplay and try your best to make it sound like a good like a novel, but it was tough, in that short of time. So the first novel is very different than the Rare Bird publication that came out August 10th, just August 10th. The difference is I had time to go back and flesh it out. I fleshed it out with historical anecdotes of things that happened. I developed the characters, what was going on inside their heads, all those things that you can do in a novel, but it takes time to think it through. And another challenge was John Milius and I had very different writing styles, I would say I'm a little more, simple and down home, and he's more grand, and so it shows. And so the idea of blending these two very different styles, making it kind of a smooth read, was something of a challenge, and that took time. And that challenge was to make it a good read and to make it interesting and add new material. And so that's the difference.
Okay, great. So someone would like to know, what is your favorite thing about surfing? And do you have a favorite memory that you'd like to share?
You want to tell one thing?
Well, it's easy. I mean, well, no, it's not easy, because I don't know if there's a single element that makes surfing so attractive. It's quite a few things working synergistically to produce a stoked experience. One thing, first of all, is just simply the ocean. And Denny and I, since we were little kids, we were going out in the ocean, and the ocean is just, I mean, as you leave the land behind and everything that's on land, and it's a special environment, and it's just beautiful. I mean, salt water is therapeutic. Everything about it is beautiful. I mean, dolphins, porpoising, and kelp beds, and glassy waves starting to feather and break. All of this, it's just spectacularly beautiful nature, that environment. And then you add to it the dynamic nature of waves. I've tried to explain to people that are skiers, and I said, well, the hill is static, just stays there, and you go over the hill. Surfing, it's dynamic, this energy moving through the water, and you catch that energy, and that energy creates acceleration. It creates centripetal and centrifugal forces, and also speed. And all these things thrill the senses. And as little kids, you always love to be physically thrilled, whether it's racing your bicycle or skateboard down a hill or swinging through tree branches, whatever it may be. It's physical sensations were thrilling. And especially here, I mean, you have positive G's, centrifugal and centripetal forces, all of this. And so you combine that, not just in a theme park somewhere, but no, in nature, the most beautiful environment you can imagine. There you are on some point, and that sunrise, and it's just spectacularly beautiful environment. If you just sat there on your board, it'd be beautiful. But then combine that with a wave, and it's just the feelings of riding down a wave, and especially a bigger wave that really has some speed and power to it. And then all these forces are magnified. And that gives what all surfers say is the absolute stoke. And there's no way to satiate it. You want more and more and more.
Hook for life. Yeah, that's it. I concur with everything Raj said. That's exactly it. I say one thing about a memory that sticks out. When you've been surfing for 60 years or more, you have a million great memories. Yeah, every time you go surfing, there's something that happens that's great. But I'll go to last winter. It was so satisfying because at 74 years old, I was at Rincon. I lived near this great place below Santa Barbara, a perfect point break surf called Rincon. Most people know about it. And it was a pretty big day. And I took off on this really hollow wave, and I was going so fast down that wave, it just suddenly came over on me, which Rincon can do, and turn into this tubular section. And I was actually inside the green room, they call it. I was completely, but there was a moment where if you were from the beach, you couldn't see me. And I felt so satisfying that, wow, I'm 74 and I can still get in the tube. And so that was what is called the ultimate experience for some people. And inside in the book, at the end, it talks about Matt Johnson, the main character, getting inside the tube. And that's what that is, the green room, or, just engulfed in this strange experience where it's almost like the eye of a hurricane. It's calm in a strange way, where you're all this chaos going around you, but then you come out into the sunlight and you just let out a big scream. So
It
Okay.
sounds fantastic. It
is.
sounds fantastic. How
That's what it
hard
is.
is it to learn to do?
It's not easy.
Mhm.
It takes time. It helps to have a teacher. I've taught surfing, and I know how difficult it can be. And I would take a summer of going at it, and you can do pretty good.
That's fantastic. So how long did it take you to write the book, and what are your hopes for the book?
Okay. As far as how long it took me to write the book, you have to understand that John Milius and I worked almost 2 years on the screenplay, and so a lot of the material from the that went into the book was from the screenplay. But the challenge of making that a real novel was what took a lot of time. And I already had a lot of the material, but I had to take things that I had written before. I wrote a surf story for Surfer magazine called No Pants Mance, which one of the articles that I drew from to flesh it out with. And there was other stories and some stories that John had written, some other material from excerpts about surfing the big day at the overhead above Ventura. And I had to take all these pieces. It was like a pile of lumber, and I'm going to build something new out of it. All these different articles and things. So there was some research involved, and it's a matter of painstakingly going through it and trying to make every sentence have some kind of poetry to it, at the same time make sense and forward the story. So all those things, I'd say a few years to really do it.
And what are your hopes for the book now?
Yeah, that part of it. Yes, thank you. It was always my dream that this would be something that could be shared on a wide scale, because I think it's a valuable depiction of a great colorful time in California history. The California dream of early surfing, and that's when so many things happened. The Beach Boys came out of that, and the surf music, and it was all inspired a little bit by the Gidget movies, and this new colorful thing that people have sang about was a great time, and just a fascination of what California was like then, that people would read the book and got a vicarious experience and learn something about a nice time in California. So I was hoping my dream would be kids in the senior high school English class or something would get onto it. Like we had to read Catcher in the Rye. I want them to read Big Wednesday.
So are you going to be touring a little bit more, like making some appearances, even if it's virtual?
To tell you, yes, to tell you the truth, I surfing has always been huge on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
Really?
And, in the early 60s, that was one of the main markets for surf longboards, even before there were shortboards. Dewey Weber surfboards, he would send hundreds of boards there, and all the Jacobs and Hansen surfboards. I remember I worked for those guys, and I'd pack up the boards and then ship them to the East Coast. It was a big fad along the East Coast, and it's always been a big market for surfing. There's all the Ron John surf shops, and of course, it kept developing, and you end up with Kelly Slater, from Florida.
How many surfboards do you both own?
Well, I wish I kept all the great classic ones I had, because they're worth a lot of money now.
Yes.
But I think I got 4 boards.
You
Some shorter ones and mostly a longer board. But anyway, the point is, I would like to go along the East Coast sometime and go to some the spots along there, because I think people would show up for a book signing.
Absolutely.
But I'm doing my best. I'm doing one this Saturday down at it's called the Surfing Heritage and Cultural Center in San Clemente. It's this Saturday, and we're going to have a book signing event there. It should be a lot of fun. It's a great place to have that. So
great. Well, it's a great book. It looks terrific. It's a really nice edition. So congratulations.
thank you.
And thank you for going to another type of green room.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
For struggling to get into that green
Well,
room. And I'm
appreciate
so
it.
glad that you made it on. And thank you for, just a wonderful conversation. And I will never, the dynamic nature of waves. I will
Thank you.
always hold that in my heart. You really described that beautifully. So, and I hope maybe we'll see you in person one of these days in Florida.
I appreciate you and everybody that tuned in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
And everyone, just remember, you just have to press the green button to purchase a copy. We'll ship it out to you. If you're in Miami, you want to come by one of our stores and pick up a copy. Aha, there you go. We have it there too. There you go. It's beautiful cover. Beautiful. All right, everyone. Stay safe.
Adios.
Bye.
Aloha.
Hasta luego.